Hello, what is up, Bears fans? Welcome to your latest episode of your Chicago Bears Huddle podcast, your UK take on all things Chicago Bears. Could the Bears be about to pull something that no one, well, perhaps no one, but a lot of people are not expecting to A, clear up some cap space, to B, shake the roster up a little bit, and to C, perhaps kind of answer what we all kind of think and suspect. Yes, we know that the running back room is a bit of an issue. We know that there are concerns over the Bears running back room. We know the Bears were linked with several free agent running backs, all of which have kind of all ended. Obviously, Nick Chubb was a big link. Well, I think it was an unsubstantiated link that was talked and started by obviously that radio station in Cleveland and kind of run with by a number of Bears fan media, well, by Bears fans. Obviously, Nick Chubb is now a Houston Texan. The next one, obviously, that kind of came off the rank was the J.K. Dobbins rumour. Dobbins, who'd been with the Chargers, had that tender put on him. But however, J.K. Dobbins is now a Denver Bronco. So both J.K. Dobbins and, of course, Nick Chubb are off the market and will not be Chicago Bears. You know, as I kind of said the other day on the video, I think the Bears are looking at it maybe in terms of the fact that, do you know what? We're not in a position yet to kind of add that little bit of extra spice on top of the running back position. We have other needs in this team that may need to be addressed in or before training camp. The edge rusher position, for example, backing up the safeties, things like that may need to be addressed. But, with the running back room as it presently stands with D'Andre Swift, Roschon Johnson, Ian Wheeler, Travis Homer, and of course Kyle Monongai. Now, one of the there's obviously been trade rumours as well. Obviously, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, those guys, obviously, James Cook from the Buffalo Bills. But in all those situations, I can't see Ryan Poles going out and giving up draft capital for any of those players. I genuinely don't see that as a possibility. The latest one, obviously, the James Cook one from the Buffalo Bills, I can't see them giving up possibly a third-round pick to a player who's going to need a new contract, who's going to need paying. And nobody really pays running backs these days. What you tend to do with them is you tend to draft one. You run with that running back for about 4 or 5 years, depending on the length of their contract. You then, unless they're Saquon Barkley, you kind of ditch them and then you move on. That seems to be the new way of working things. And, the days of the Walter Paytons are done and dusted now. You've got to also bear in mind as well that Ben Johnson spoken exceptionally highly of Kyle Monongai, in his performance in rookie minicamp, his performance in OTAs, and his performance in minicamp. Now, I know it's football in shorts, and you can never, ever really base anything on football in shorts. But the latest story that seems to be emanating from the Bears is that there may be a surprise cut ahead if a trade can't be found. Yes, who is that player? You may ask. It is D'Andre Swift. That is the rumour that is coming out of the Bears organisation. Why is that rumour coming out? Well, first of all, it is about the fact that it's about saving money. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at how can we save money, how can we free up cap space. The Bears cap space is tight at this moment in time, and there is an element there of them wanting to kind of look at it, perhaps free up some cap space. D'Andre Swift is a possibility to free up. Now, if you look at D'Andre Swift and his present salary going into 2025, his cap number is $9.3 million. Going into 2026, it is $8.83 million. His dead cap hit for a cut pre-June 1st would be $10 million of dead money. That would then decrease to $1 million of dead money next year. So it could be that they look to cut him, they look to get rid of him to save a little bit of money against the cap. However, of course, they may look to trade him. That may be another one. Now, why? I hear you ask, why would they do that though? Why would they cut their number one running back? Well, because of the fact that he hasn't been overly impressive during his time in Chicago. If you go back to last season, yes, he did rush for 969 yards behind a vastly inferior offensive line in a very, very poor offense that was being called by possibly one of the worst offensive coordinators ever to call a game of football, and a team coached by someone who didn't know how to use timeouts, didn't know how to inspire his players, didn't know how to coach, and didn't know how to do a lot, to be honest with you, in Matt Eberflus. Now, look, the situation is such that, there is a real chance that this possibly could happen. You've also got to relate to the fact that, even though DeAndre Swift is, at the moment, in theory, not on paper, because as Ben Johnson repeatedly tells us, there is no depth chart. He is, in theory, the Bears running back one. However, you can go back to his time in Detroit. Ben Johnson worked with DeAndre Swift in Detroit. And I think, if you look at the fact that he was traded from Detroit to the Eagles, he never, ever was particularly well thought of by Ben Johnson and the Lions. You look at the fact that in the Lions offense he was sparingly used. There was others promoted to run ahead of him. There was others promoted to carry the ball a whole lot more than him, who were perhaps, people may say were not as good a running back. The trust was not there. Now, is Ben Johnson's trust, is Ben Johnson's faith in DeAndre Swift going to massively have changed over the last few years? Is the fact that he's worked with him now in OTAs and in mini camps suddenly going to change his opinion of DeAndre Swift? I find it highly doubtful. Like I said, there's this previous there. Ben Johnson quite clearly it doesn't rate him particularly, doesn't think that he's a top running back. You can see that from the fact that he did not at any point try to stop DeAndre Swift from being traded away from the Lions. You've also got to look at the fact that he's had one decent season in 5. Obviously, that was the rushing for over 1,000 yards in Philadelphia, which in theory, to be honest with you, behind Philadelphia's offensive line, I think I could probably do a reasonably good job, and I'm fat and unfit. That offensive line is particularly awesome. He's like I said, people argue that 969 behind that awful offensive line was good. Yeah, it's not bad, but 3.8 yards per carry is the worst of his career. Now, you could argue again that's down to the offensive line, it's down to the play calling, it's down to Coach Flus, it's down to the quarterback play, which I think would be wrong. I think DeAndre Swift quite clearly is someone that, does have his problems. He dances a little bit too much, often does have happy feet. He also, as well, doesn't read the game particularly well. He doesn't read the holes particularly well. And he's always a guy who's looking for that home run ball rather than, at times taking the solid 2, 3, 4 yards to kind of consolidate a drive or to help a drive continue. Even going pre-Philly, his numbers didn't really pull up any massive, huge trees in this time in Detroit. He wasn't a substantial part of their offense. Yes, he did carry the ball over 100 times in 2020 and 2021, but like I said, there was often times where he was kind of forced out of the offense and not looked to by Coach Ben Johnson during his time with him. Looking at that 2022 season, but this is, like I said, it's an odd rumour that's come out. It's an odd story that's come out that Swift could be surplus to requirements. The Bears could be, first of all, looking to trade him, and if they can't trade him, then obviously they may then cut him. Now, if that was to happen, you'd ask yourself, what is the situation there? Now, maybe they look for someone, close to training camp. Once that that cap space is freed up, they go out and they look at some other options there. Antonio Gibson of the Patriots has been mentioned as one possible option. Jamal Williams, another one. Gus Edwards, another one that's been mentioned as possibles. However, it may be that looking at the coaching staff, looking at Eric Bieniemy and what he's been doing and saying, looking at what Ben Johnson thinks of the offense, that in Roschon Johnson, in Carmen Ungai, they may feel that they've got enough there to get through this season, with those players, along with obviously all the other weapons that they have on the offense, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet, Roma Dunze, Luther Burden, who has yet to return to practice, obviously, and obviously DJ Moore. So, look, it's a possibility, and I think DeAndre Swift is a kind of a player who I don't think is overly highly rated by the Chicago Bears fans, and I don't think there'll be a lot of tears shed if this was actually true. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it isn't true, and I'm not saying it is true. I'm saying it's a story that's come out. Most stories where there's smoke, there's fire, and etc. etc. So could DeAndre Swift be cut? Could he be traded? What are the Bears planning? It's a really interesting one, guys, as we build towards the 2025 NFL season. And, of course, first, the 2025 Bears training camp. Guys, let me know your thoughts on this story. Thanks for watching the Chicago Bears Huddle podcast. As always, if you've enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Catch you later. Bear down.